This week, workplace technology company Envoy released its latest Protecting the Workplace report, and it revealed that nearly 73%, that is, 3/4 of U.S. employees, fear a return to the workplace could pose a risk to their personal health and safety. The same study found that 94% said, yeah, but I'd like to go back into the office at least part of the time. So there's like these two different messages, right? From, we think if you ask people, they'll tell us what happens when they tell you two things that appear to be inconsistent. So with so much of this up in the air, it can be challenging to decide whether to bring all of your employees back, let all of them work remotely, or possibly offering people a mix of whatever works for them, this hybrid approach. We see that businesses are all over the place. You have, on one hand, you have Jack Dorsey at Twitter and Square who says, work remotely forever. Google just announced you can work remotely, but you're going to come back to work in the fall of 2021. This idea of fully working remotely just isn't going to happen. And then you find someone like Netflix, an organization like Netflix, where their CEO said as soon as that vaccine's available, I think he's quoted as saying within 12 seconds, people are going to have to come back to work in the workplace because that's their culture. What we know is that it's all over the place, right? What are some things business leaders should consider when making this decision? April.
I think one of the things a business leader needs to consider is the dynamic inside of the office. Office isn't just about work. It really is about socializing as well. And I think you've got to make a plan on how people can still socialize, but respect the fact that we're still in the midst of a pandemic. And even after the vaccine is rolled out, there are some who may not want to take it. There may be some who are still recovering or ill. And so the issue of being able to social distance, I think, is something that's going to be with us for quite some time. So I think as we kind of reevaluate what the workplace is going to look like, even physically, we've got to take into account that being at work means people are going to feel forced to socialize. We figured out how to do it a little differently through Zoom and other methods. But there's still that water cooler talk that is just organic to the workplace. And so I think that many people also have that in mind. And I think business owners, managers, leaders need to figure out how to balance that.
Well, in April, you say something that's really, and I've said this more and more, but you would like to think that the headlines are right and that everyone's working remotely. But we ignore the fact that Walmart has 1.5 million employees, the largest U.S. employer. Its people didn't have the luxury of working remotely. We're all experiencing holiday deliveries right now. Yesterday, the FedEx person knocked on my door, so did the UPS. They don't have the luxury of working remotely. Your Uber driver or Uber Eats or whatever, your DoorDash, there are a lot of people who are going to work every day. So we have to be really careful when we make it sound as if, oh, everyone's working remotely, because that's actually not true. So what we're doing is we're seeing companies wrestle through this, Andrew, and I want to talk with you about, let's say a company whose employees were allowed to work remotely for a while. What if they make the decision to bring their workers back into the office setting? What should go into their return to office strategy?
I think they need to think about what guarantees or what supports the highest level of efficiency and productivity and happiness in the employee, so that to April's point, right, around safety and comfort and socialization and socializing in the office, as well as tasking, that people are, if you're in the position to make the decision about whether people come back or when they come back and how they come back, that you really take into consideration where productivity and efficiency happens. And by forcing somebody to come back, beyond the comfort of, do they want to come back because they're scared, are they actually getting more work done in smaller batches of time for you by working remotely? And is it only because you have this idea that everybody has to be together? I mean, and certainly for the people who are more introverted or who enjoy quiet time and working alone, they're still good collaborators, but they appreciate the not being interrupted that often happens in cultures when we're all in the same office together, and certainly in open floor plans. So I think it's essential that we ask where's your sweet spot, and that we are supporting the individual workers in finding that sweet spot. I mean, maybe they're not even paying attention, right? They're just doing their job, and they haven't really been introspective because they've got kids at home, or they've got other family members, maybe people that have been that have had COVID or have COVID. You know, they're navigating all of these different variables at the same time, and so they basically just moved from chaos to new chaos. But there's no better system at home. It's just familiar because the environment is familiar. So I think the investigation, it doesn't need to be a complicated investigation, but the investigation of where's your sweet spot? Where are you able to actually produce in the way that we need you and want you to, and you also feel productive and cared for and safe?
We're going to get back to that because that's a real issue, and we're getting to, I've heard both of you kind of talk about the individual, but to be honest, you know, the CEO, the board, the organization has a true culture, and it's okay to say, I get it, you work better at home remotely, but we don't think that's good for us. So maybe this isn't the place for you to work. Andrew, react to that.
Oh, I think that's it. I mean, look, in my work, as I travel around the world training folks, it is not unusual by the time we get through a half day or a full day training for somebody in the room to say, oh my God, this is not the culture for me. Now that we're doing this work and we're probing and we're pushing, I will never be happy here, and you have a miserable employee. I need to find a different place to work. And I think that it can be okay on both sides of that fence, right? I mean, if the culture is, I don't want to say unyielding with any sort of spin on it, right? But if the culture is, this is our culture and we want you to be happy, but we want the culture to be integrous more than we care about your particular interaction with the culture, then that's important information to have. And if you constantly are internally fighting to fit into a culture that doesn't support you, you're going to be miserable. You'll produce to the degree that you can produce, but you might not excel. So the management has an employee that's not optimized. They're not working at optimal levels. They're a little miserable. That can't be good for anybody. So,
that's right.
You know.
Yeah, April, I'd love you to just chime in on that because I saw you, you know, you're like, let me get in there, coach. Yes, talk, because you live this, especially in small and medium-sized businesses.
Sure, there's some good points that were made there with regards to the culture and the feel and the environment inside of the organization. I remember years ago, I think her name is Melissa Mayer, who became the CEO of Yahoo. And it's a tech company. They worked remotely. And one of the first things she did was called everybody back to the office and said that there's a synergy that's created when we are all here. It's those micro conversations where great ideas are born, and we need everyone here to do that. And some people kind of bridled at that, you know, because it's tech, we rely on our technology and we can do this someplace else. And so she wanted that energy there. I think that's really important. I think it also, you know, you have to take into account generationally, right? Baby boomers and older Gen Xers, we live on presenteeism. You must be here to get your work done. If I can see you working, then you know, it's obvious you are probably being productive. And again, that's not always the case. We know statistically that most online shopping happens during working hours. So I do think that you have to kind of look at things, I think in a broader sense, culturally, does it make sense? And if that is the case, how do we bring people back safely? But there still may be people on the fringe who are fine based on their personality and job necessity. They can work from home. So I do think that almost like shaking the Etch-a-Sketch, when everybody got sent home, it was a time to kind of redesign what we need. And again, to your point, Andrew, if the culture says, we need you here for that collaboration, there's an energy that comes along with it, then by all means, figure out how to make that happen. And for those who say, I'm better off at home, then maybe it goes kind of granular into, does that make sense for the team, for the organization? I think you kind of look at it from both sides of that coin.
That's absolutely right. You mentioned technology, April, with so many workplaces already relying on Slack, Microsoft Teams, Zoom, Google, if I say the wrong, all of the tools, right? How to collaborate. How can these new tools assist in work integration? The obvious answer is, they allow us to not be limited in time and space. We don't have to be in a physical. But what are the other obvious opportunities and advantages to them?
There are many. I've talked about remote work for years. I've talked about it before it was a necessity, and when it was still an option. It was something that was almost a status symbol that you were trusted enough to work from home.
That's right.
And so I think one of the disadvantages when you have part of your team working remotely and part of your team coming into the office is the team that's in the office, they get the manager's FaceTime. So when there's an opportunity in the office, that person may be top of mind, and now we've created this imbalance. And so I've always said, somehow level that playing field. You've got to be able to go face to face, but also incorporate technology and going face to face virtually so that those who aren't able to see the manager are still in front of the manager. So I think this is an opportunity to leverage that. We used to scoff at people who would send an email to an office mate 2 offices down. But if that becomes a natural process, then those who aren't in the physical building don't feel less than. So I think it's really important to integrate it all. Don't leave it behind, even when people come to the office, especially if the option of remote work is going to still exist. It's a great way to become a leveling playing field for those who need FaceTime with the manager.
But Andrew, let's be honest here. I mean, one of the things that we struggle with is acknowledging that human beings are human beings, right? And the reality is, they call it virtual reality because it's virtually real, but it's not actually real. There are some serious advantages, no matter what we do to try to minimize the differences in terms of relationships. We know this in DE&I work that people from underrepresented communities have said part of the reason I can't go up the corporate ladder is because I don't get enough FaceTime. And as much as the technology works, you will still you won't be able to replicate it. So if you're great, your colleague is great, but your colleague's in the office every day talking with people and you're not, guess what? April said it best. Out of sight, out of mind. And when it's time to make those decisions, you are going to be at a disadvantage. Is that not fair? And why aren't we talking about that and being honest?
Well, I think we definitely do need to talk about it, and I want to talk about it, and I also just want to dovetail on the technology itself and say that from a productivity point of view, migrating people off of email internally is one of the first things that I suggest with any company that I'm working with. And so whether it's Microsoft Teams or Slack, just getting out of your inbox, we've seen 30, 40, 50% increase in productivity just by getting people internal communications off of email itself. And so that email is only used for external communication. So I want to plant that seed, and then we can pivot back to this idea of real-time FaceTime and how we can amplify that, right? And if it is a reality, and it is a reality, I think we have to talk about it and figure out how to spread FaceTime around so that it isn't virtual FaceTime. And even if it is, again, when we think about flex time working,
right,
perhaps you get FaceTime with your manager, your supervisor at a Starbucks down the block, right? It doesn't need to be in the office as long as it is that FaceTime. And perhaps there's a small group meeting in person that is not necessarily in the traditional office. But are there other places that folks can gather at different times that works so that we have the same sense of synergy? The locale has differed, and then it would be the noble experiment to see if still, when we think about climbing the ladder, if the folks that were in the office were somehow still being promoted more because during 9 to 5 in that building was still the key location, versus it isn't really about even FaceTime in person. It's about physically being in the place where the tasking is happening. It's an integral part of the acceleration and the advancement. So we would know for certain whether it was predicated only on being in the same space physically, or also the space where the work happens.